Welcome to Energy 101. Today we have Kerry all the way from DC. She is a lawyer for Hunt and Andrews. May have heard of them. I haven't, but I'm about to find out. So you're a lawyer specifically when it comes to permitting, which guess what? Has a lot to do with oil and gas, energy, mining, minerals, like everything. This is Energy 101. So let's hear the lawyer side of all of this.
Great. Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I am a partner with Hunt and Andrews Kurth, and my specialty is environmental permitting and litigation related to those permits for energy, mostly complex energy and infrastructure projects. So anytime anybody wants to build any kind of oil and gas project, electric utility project, new generation, and mining, I do some mining work too. You typically need permits from the federal government, whether that's from EPA, other agencies, the Department of Energy, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We can kind of get into that whole landscape. But, people come to us when they have very complex sort of big projects. It helps that we're in DC, so we have good relationships with the regulators there and can help them navigate their permitting process. And, sometimes we get the question of, why would I need a lawyer for that? Isn't it a technical process? And it can be, but
you need a lawyer for everything.
You need a lawyer for everything is really the answer.
Just think like
Absolutely.
that.
And frankly, like most of the projects we work on are complicated and sometimes controversial. And so you have to prepare for the possibility that your permit is going to get challenged. And the way to do that in a good way is to get lawyers involved early so that they can help you make sure that you have a good record and support for the permit. So anyway, I'm excited to be with you guys today to talk about permitting and what's going on in DC and kind of the landscape for energy projects.
Oh yeah, there's so many ways to go. Can we is there any kind of way we can just get a timeline of like a start to finish on any kind of project, right? So let's say we're talking about land, right? Like the permit is for the land. And we all know the minerals that's underneath, right? Does it have to do with that?
Well, so it can. But so, for example, if you want to build a natural gas pipeline and that pipeline has to cross wetlands, it sometimes can cross through areas that have endangered species that you might need to impact their habitat. If you have to do any kind of water crossing,
people's backyards.
If you want to cross federal lands, that's a whole thing. And out west, that's frequently you have to cross, Park Service or Forest Service lands to site some of those projects. And so anytime you basically impact a federal resource, which is, again, wetlands, waters, endangered species, public lands, that typically triggers a requirement to get some kind of federal authorization.
Yeah. So let's maybe bring up something that's existing, like trying to get a pipeline from Alaska down to California.
Sure.
Which I'm not even sure have they ever finished or done that?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah.
That's like current.
Yes.
So let's say they allow the mining up on the north slope of Alaska, which is like where they have people drilling in like negative 50 degrees for some reason. And then they need to get the gas out and they need to start bringing it south. So they start building pipeline. Like, what's the first thing they're going to come across, getting right the second they are right outside their jurisdiction?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that any of these projects do is, they map it out and they try to avoid, frankly, federal resources where they can, because if you don't have to go through that permit process, that's even better. But so most of them do.
They're trying to do all the work before more work comes.
This is where all the engineers come in and the people that have like the technical brain and that know the area. They'll do biological surveys. They'll do, wetlands delineations. They'll do all kinds of site work to figure out what is going on the land and what would you need to do to be able to build there. That's sort of well before we get involved usually. Although it would be great if we would get involved earlier sometimes so that we could say, hey, avoid this or avoid that. But usually they come to us with a, designed project and say, we need to get this approved. We need an Army Corps of Engineers permit for wetlands. We need a BLM authorization to cross BLM lands. Sorry, I'm not supposed to do acronyms. Bureau of Land Management is BLM.
People are going to start thinking Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, exactly.
I hear that acronym a lot in oil and gas. But I got to remember, just in case grandma's watching.
That's right. I'm trying to avoid the alphabet soup that we do in DC.
You want to let your kid know what you do.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so they want to get the lawyers involved, but they want to like save money. Like they want to do as much work as possible, but you're not just gonna get it all done by yourself, regardless.
Right, and there's sort of the aspect of just getting a permit, which is something that can be a very complicated process. When you need a federal permit, there's a requirement to do an environmental review. NEPA review is what it's called. And that is supposed to be the agencies looking at what are all the environmental impacts of this action and should we do it? And that NEPA process, you probably have heard in DC, from DC talking about a lot about permitting reform. And that's kind of a big component of that is, can we do how long can we do this environmental review faster? How in depth does the environmental review need to be? How much information does the agency need to give you a permit? And so that's has been in a flux in the last 8 or 9 months. So it's sort of an interesting time to be doing permitting because there's been a lot of changes.
The one example you gave was about like pipeline.
Sure.
Is there any kind of permitting before getting started on like drilling or mining or building a wind turbine? Like what are the differences there?
So it almost always depends on where you are and so what's going on the land. But for mining, often you're going to need a lease from the Bureau of Land Management or wherever the resource is. If you're going to mine a resource that's on public lands, and a lot of the mining in our country occurs on public lands where people have purchased leases from the federal government to do that. So it's not your land, but you own the mineral resource.
So that agency is federal?
That's federal. And often there's a federal and state sort of overlap. So you often have to get your federal permits and then you have to go to the state and get that too. Sometimes county and local too.
Ooh.
Yeah, just a triple threat. So for mining, usually you're getting a permit from either the Bureau of Land Management or the U.S. Forest Service if it's on Forest Service lands. And they have to approve your plan. What are you going to do with this mine? And they think about things like water usage. When you're drilling down, are you going to impact the groundwater table? Species usually becomes a big issue. Tribal issues usually become a big thing because as part of that authorization, they have to involve any tribes that might have an interest. And out west, of course, that's a big where most of the public lands are, there are usually a lot of tribes that have an interest in the land. So that's for mining, I guess. And, with wind, that's an interesting one because it's, again, this administration has pushed back against wind, right? And so my clients that are wind developers basically are trying to do anything they can to avoid siting their wind projects in an area that would require a federal permit because they know the Trump administration does not like wind projects. And so you don't want to have to go get a permit from them. And a lot of times those projects can be sited without, onshore can be sited without getting federal permits as long as you do it on private land.
Really? Okay. So like you can own your own property, put a wind turbine up with like no paperwork?
Well, you probably, depending on where you are, there might be state requirements, but there might not be federal requirements. Now, if you're going to build your wind project in an area where a bunch of endangered species birds migrate through every year, and you're probably, they might die in your wind, in the turbines, then you will need to get federal authorization. But if you can site it on private lands, if you can avoid or at least minimize impacts to species, some of those projects don't have to get federal authorization, which makes it less fun for me, but good for our clients that don't have to go through that whole process.
Yeah. And that's kind of like where my knowledge hits a wall, where I would love to hear more, but we'll have to have you on with more of our technical hosts to get into that. That makes me think about offshore stuff. So, there's like uncharted territory in the ocean, but like, right off the Gulf and stuff, like that's all super regulated and the same, basically might as well be land. So like, have you worked with like things off the shore, basically?
Yes.
With wind or the oil rigs?
Yeah. And, my colleagues at my firm do a lot of offshore oil and gas drilling. I haven't worked on that as much, but I have worked on offshore wind projects, which is honestly, it's a similar process. You have to, again, get a lease from the federal government on the outer continental shelf. And you have to be able to build something there. You have to get federal authorization. That's for offshore wind. It's from the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, BOEM. And again, you have to go through a big environmental review, and that would look at things like, are there whale migrations that come through here? Are there even things like, are there historic shipwrecks that are in the area that you might impact, because those can be protected historic resources? So you have to look at kind of, what's going on the ocean floor. And then you also have to look at things like, how are we going to get all of the equipment here? We have to bring a bunch of barges out here. What are the emissions from those barges going to be? So you have to sort of look at kind of everything that's going to go into that project in the environmental review. And the agency has to show that it has like sort of taken a hard look at those impacts before it can issue you an authorization.
Wow. Yeah, the logistics is just a nightmare
It's
to
very,
think about.
Very complex. Yes, yeah.
So you say you haven't really worked on the offshore stuff, but like, how much have you touched it? I find it so interesting how they literally just draw like these made up borders, like blocks in the ocean, which like if you take away the blocks, it's just water. So it's like, how do they even like think about measuring, and just like, how do they even like know? It's like, okay, I'm in the middle of the ocean. You look all around, you see nothing. It's like, oh, this is where our lease ends. Like, do you have any experience?
No,
like,
that's above my, that's like, that's when you would call in your engineers and your consultants for that. But I mean, it's very well, as you said, very structured, very much like, here's your little area. And, and it costs X amount for that, per area, and, which can be, expensive. And there's a lot of jockeying, I think, on how to put together, if you want to have a couple of rigs, for example, how you want to get a few things next to each other, you need to coordinate the transportation in and out. It's very complicated. And I haven't done a lot of offshore projects, but
you're not lining up either.
Well, it's interesting. I think, a lot of, for the past few years, I've been very focused on sort of energy transition and projects that go toward decarbonizing. Those are sort of like bread and butter, old school projects. And I think, they're not going away anytime soon, but there's more of a like regular cadence to them, sort of like people know how to do it, versus on some of these more, newer technologies like carbon capture or a wind project. It's, the permitting process is evolving as the technologies evolve. And so it's more complicated. You might need a lawyer more frequently for that kind of thing than for, offshore oil and gas drilling, where like it's been around for a long time and not much has changed.
Right. So, I mean, how long have you been in your field where like you're adapting and you are up to date, or, like, how long have you been doing it?
So I've been at the firm and in my role for 15 years. I went to the firm straight out of law school. And the reason I picked the firm was because they had a really deep environmental practice, which is not very common. Like a lot of law firms will have like one or two people that do environmental work, but we have about 40 across the country. We've got a DC office, we've got Houston, we've got California folks, we've got some folks in North Carolina and New York. So it was a really neat opportunity to learn from people who have been in the midst of it in DC. They helped get these laws passed, in the 70s and 80s. And then And then so I got to learn from a lot of kind of really people who sort of paved the way in the field.
The veterans.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you probably, you joined, you love the environmental approach to it. And then I'm assuming in the last, almost 2 decades, you've learned that no, even if you are working for wind or hydro or anything, there's so much non-environmental things happening to set up the environmental things, right? You kind of get in this spiral of like nihilism that I love to bring up in this show. And here at Collide, like we are an AI tech company for energy, and all of our customers are upstream oil and gas. So we are very oil and gas forward, but a lot of we're not like big scary oil men. Like we hate wind and stuff like that. Like we're very energy adjacent. But how has your thoughts changed on that kind of stuff when you're like, oh, I'm gonna go be a lawyer and be like an activist or, just stand up for a better future. And then you kind of 15 years later, like really seeing what happens behind the scenes. Like what is like your full story and take on all that, and what have you seen? And
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, when you go to work at a law firm, your clients are mostly industry clients. And so you're working for project developers and proponents. And so, I certainly have done a lot of oil and gas over the years, and a lot of, I've represented electric utilities and then, in the last few years, some more of the renewable and kind of, newer players. But, maybe this is me just drinking the Kool-Aid after all of this time, but I think one of the things that has always really struck me about working for industry is it's kind of neat to see things get built and help things get built and help power, what's going on. And so there's definitely shifts over the years and different administrations and different market, realities that change, like what's our power mix going to be and how are we going to get all of this power out to the grid. But what I enjoy about it is, the individual projects change, but for a lot of our clients, it's really the goal is how do we get power out to the people and, make money in a way that we're complying with all the rules. And so there is a push-pull in Washington, which has been, we can talk about that, and that's been interesting to live through. But a lot of times the sort of basics of we want to build something, we want to build a new generation, we want to build a transmission line to get power to this area, we want to build a pipeline, those kinds of things. It's a lot of the same kind of nuts and bolts, and it's kind of fun to work on something where I think not a lot of lawyers, you're fighting over contracts or you're fighting over money. And that's not like to say that that's not involved, but it's an actual tangible project that hopefully will get built at the end of the day.
Yeah, that helped me kind of cope with everything. Like seeing how everything works and becoming educated on it all just kind of made it more fascinating other than like a controversial or, whatever. I was like, oh, this is just how things are and things will be. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
So you bring it up DC, and that's where you live and work.
Yes.
And energy, energy is everything. And energy is political, and energy is, ever changing. So what have you seen, in the last few administrations? Like I would think, just as an assumption right now, that like there's not a whole lot of flip-flopping no matter who's behind, the desk in the Oval Office, because this country strives on energy security not failing. Like everyone, like we do what it takes to keep everyone's lights on and be like the first world country that we are, right? And an example I always think of is how Kamala was trying to, get the presidency, and she had this known talking point being like anti-fracking, and everyone was like talking about it in the news and whatever. But like everyone here, like who understand energy, were like, oh, she's gonna say she supports it. She has to. or she's screwed, right? Like, and I learned like you cannot just like completely like follow like the generic tropes you assume for these political parties. Like you kind of, no matter which party you're on, you need to be pro energy.
Yes, absolutely.
So what do you actually see in DC with these talking points?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's true that you kind of have to be pro energy. But what I have seen is shifts in the thinking on what's the best way to do that. And, for a long time, the focus has been on decarbonization. And, with the Biden administration, starting with the Obama administration, but, particularly in the Biden administration, it is, yes, we need energy, but we don't want to prioritize certain types of energy that have high levels of CO2. We want more environmentally friendly technologies. And, so renewables, being sort of the push, right? Wind and solar, battery, carbon capture and storage. And, with this administration, and so that was always kind of the Republican talking points during that phase were always, we need all of the above, right? Fine, renewable energy is good. We need all of the above. The shift in the last few months, which has been honestly kind of surprising to me how fast we shifted, has been, energy dominance and also fossil fuels, focus on fossil fuels, focus on coal, focus on, keeping those plants running, focus on, oil and gas. And it's not really an all of the above strategy anymore. I mean, the administration has made its dislike for wind and solar pretty clear. And so it is sort of a pivot a little bit. A lot of our clients aren't changing up their whole strategies on what, type of projects they want to do, but it does change the calculus on, you probably can't get a wind project built right now on federal lands. That's just not going to happen. So go back and focus on other types of projects. So that in that respect, there has been, a shift. And, one of the things that has been a big sort of buzzy thing in DC is permitting reform, with every, Congress. And it's a bipartisan issue. Comes in, everybody kind of agrees it takes too long in this country to get things built. That's sort of a baseline talking point that everybody has. And so what this administration has done is say, yes, and we are going to prioritize fossil fuel projects, get those permits done first. Those are the permits that get highest priority. So those projects have a shorter time frame right now than other projects. So that's been sort of the interesting shift that we're seeing in DC. And, I wouldn't say a lot of our clients have had to totally pivot, but it's just a different, generation mix, a different approach to your business model that you have to account for the realities of what you're going to be able to get permitted.
I mean, I can look past all the flashy Trumpisms and drill baby drill and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you think there's just like a genuine like idea that we want to stick with like these conventional ways of getting our energy from like coal, oil, and gas because it's just less risky? We've been running this process for literally over 100 years now. Meanwhile, like all these new renewable projects are relatively newer, always changing, always getting better, but it's like it's not so grandfathered in. And going back to the topic of you saying like we take too long to get things done here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's because we are ethical and we have really good laws and rules. So like people don't die and 14-year-old kids aren't working in factories. Like there's a reason that things take a while here and that we do a lot of things overseas. So do you think that has something to do with, is that a good excuse basically for the current administration that's why they're saying no to wind and solar?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is, that is what they would say, right? And I think the what's happening right now, and you can't really talk about energy right now without talking about data centers and AI, right? I mean, that is what we're hearing from our clients right now is we need as much generation as we can get. So we want it all, right? We want to keep the coal plants running. We want to build more natural gas. We want it, fine. If you can build a wind farm, do that. If you can build solar, that's great. But their view is just they know that the demand is skyrocketing and they need to be able to figure out how to meet that. And, as you say, traditional fossil fuels are right now a big part of being able to do that. We can't do it without that right now. I think it's still good to be thinking about other technologies and to make sure that, we haven't totally abandoned the idea of evaluating our emissions here and there, and trying to, further technologies that allow for that. But again, I think at least for our clients, what we're seeing is you kind of need it all. You cannot forsake the fossil fuels in favor of renewables. That's just not where we are right now. And you can't do that and provide reliable power.
Yeah. You're bringing up the high performance computing.
Yeah.
That is what's happening. The way these LLMs are growing, AI, even the robots are on the way. I see it somewhere on my feed every day, like literal, like Futurama robots, like are happening doing chores in our house. So that's cool. But where is that all coming from? And you almost kind of made it sound like we're desperate. It's like we have to use coal still, like because we got to stay on top of this. Maybe it has something to do with like the U.S. being obsessed with leading in industries and stuff. We feel insecure that China is like kicking our ass sometimes, and it's like we got to make sure we're top dog and stay on top of things. And when it comes to these data centers and it coming with being desperate, we're talking about putting nuclear back on, which is kind of like some people still think nuclear is like, oh my God, Chernobyl, yada yada. It's like, well, no, it's not desperate. It's actually a really good idea. We should have been using nuclear this whole time. Yeah. It's kind of like a life hack that we just got scared of because of the public perception, like the worst PR ever. It's actually still exists, and some countries are almost completely running off of it, and we're kind of missing out. So it's nice that we are something happened to make us rethink it. Yeah. And when you talk about nuclear, you think regulatory. You want to talk about things taking too long. Yes. Nuclear is one of those. Yeah. Has your firm touched nuclear?
Yes. And just you're right that I'm kind of talking about it as if we're desperate, and it's not, because it's more just that our clients that have forecast out how much power are we going to need in the next 5, 10, 20 years. I mean, this AI boom was just not something that 5 or 10 years ago we were planning for. We just weren't. And so they need to pivot. They need to figure out how to account for that. And to your point, I think this administration, and they're not alone in saying this, they think, keeping up with China on AI is a national security issue. It's not just, we want to,
flex.
Yeah. I mean, and you can see all of the bravado behind that, right? Like, it's not mutually exclusive, but they see that as, we need to be able to compete. To do that, you need a lot of power. And so, getting back to your point on nuclear, that we definitely have folks within our firm. We actually have a gentleman in our Tokyo office who's been doing all kinds of stuff on nuclear, and he's sort of like, finally, you guys in the U.S. are kind of getting it together. Yeah.
I mentioned countries. And Japan's obviously a huge one.
Yeah. So we're seeing, I mean, what we've seen is kind of certain clients trying to reinvigorate existing, old power plants that haven't been running. Can we get those back up and running? And then, of course, small modular reactors, the SMRs, are hot right now. And so everybody's kind of in that mode of, again, it's part of the we need it all strategy. And I think people are sort of coming back around to the idea that nuclear is relatively clean, even though, bad PR aside, it's a relatively clean technology. So it is important to develop that. And I think we're sort of still at the beginning of that resurgence, but certainly most of our clients are thinking about how they can get into that or, get back into that.
Yeah, let's finish off the nuclear talk so we don't have to revisit it. But yeah, like you said, we're bringing back old plants online, or so we're then it's like that, or you build new ones. But we're not necessarily building new ones. We're thinking of the small modular ones, which is, I guess, as simple as it sounds, just a smaller, easier to build, not supposed to power like such a wide area kind of plant. But what are the steps that are actually being made right now? Maybe not in your firm, but just in DC or things you've heard of. Like, what is everyone kind of like? What are the projects that are in the works, and how many like years are we forecasted to see some things go online?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, one of the things that, those all require Nuclear Regulatory Commission to approve, and that's notoriously been a crazy long process. I think there is a hope that the SMRs, the small modular reactors, they can do that in a shorter time frame, but we haven't seen that yet. So I think that is all of, a lot of our clients are sort of dipping their toe in on the small nuclear, on the SMRs and seeing, okay, maybe let's do, one site and we'll see how long, how fast we can get that permitted and online, and then scale if that works out. But so far what I've seen on it is a lot of people saying they want to do it and announcing plans to do it, but not a lot of actual movement in terms of getting them up and running.
Yeah. I like to think that, the nuclear has been in the energy mix this whole time, like a very small percent. I just like to think that, it's kind of big back when like a few of these plants are back online. And then when they shut off, there's been like a very small sector, working with it. And it's kind of like high performance computing. Like it's all picking up and everyone has to like get it together. And there's all these jobs being created. Like, is the talk of nuclear coming back? Is that like kind of waking up the regulatory sector of the government? They're like, okay, we need more employees because this is happening again. And there's like 5 guys who've just been doing the same job for decades.
Well, you honestly raise a really difficult tension that has been going on in DC right now, which is there's this push for faster permitting, a push to get things going, and that takes people and staff that are educated and that know what they're doing. But of course, with all of the Doge stuff, a lot of people got fired at the beginning of the administration that were career staffers or that had been in their role. And so we are seeing with a lot of the permitting, yes, they're prioritizing energy projects, but a lot of the offices are just down people and they haven't beefed up their staff, and they haven't been able to. And the people that they did add, I do a lot of carbon capture permitting, and a lot of the EPA regions that have to issue Safe Drinking Water Act permits for carbon sequestration projects in the last couple of years really beefed up their staff. But in the Doge cuts, sort of last in, first out, those were the first people to get fired. And so they spent all this time building up their forces, and now they're down a lot of people. So, and the return to work, was a big caused some exodus too, because a lot of people had been working remotely for years for the government. And then now all of a sudden, oh, you live an hour and a half away. I'm sorry, you have to come in 5 days a week. And so some people left because of that. So that was happening even before all the Doge stuff. So yeah, I think, I would say personally, I would like to see some of these agencies really staff up, because I think that is going to be critical to getting some of these projects moving.
We really are in a weird time of like where a lot of things just didn't line up. Where it was like the high performance computing, COVID, and just our political voting choices have all just come into a very scary sector of this timeline.
You had no idea that all was environmental permitting was the thread through all of that, did you?
I'm hopeful though. As I'm educated and learned a lot about this stuff, I feel more hopeful, and I think we'll get through it. I'm not going to be the one doing all this hard work, but you are.
No, I mean, it has been incredible to see our clients pivot and be resilient and think about, okay, like they're not daunted by it. They're like, okay, we got to figure out how to keep the grid reliable. We got to figure out how to keep people's lights on. And so it's just almost like a math problem of how are we going to do that? And different clients have different strategies, which is fun to see too. But they're not, they've been through swings before, right? It's not totally new, but it is sort of a perfect storm of circumstances.
Cool. Well, I think we're doing a good job at kind of just jumping around like the different energy mixes basically and getting like a very surface level take. So I appreciate it.
Good.
Let's tackle a few more. Okay. You're currently working on like CCUS stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So why don't you kind of talk about literally just maybe describe what that is.
Sure.
And not just like the magic version where everyone's like, ooh, we're just sucking carbon out the air. I mean, it kind of literally is, but maybe a little bit more detail about it and like what your job has to do with it.
Sure.
And permitting.
Yeah. So carbon capture, so it's carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration is the CCUS acronym. And by the capture part, what we mean is when you have, whether it's a power plant, an ethanol plant, any kind of project that's generating CO2 emissions, is capturing those emissions instead of releasing them into the air. And so there are these projects called direct air capture that literally just suck CO2 out of the air, but most of them are, tacked onto a power plant or something like that, where they're pulling off the CO2 emissions from a project, a facility. Then the utilization piece of that is there are some ways to use that carbon dioxide, whether that's to enhance oil and gas production. Injecting that into the ground can help with extraction. So that can be used. CO2 can be used that way. And then the piece that I work on the most is the storage. And what we mean by that is you drill injection wells and inject that you've taken the CO2 from a plant, you transport it to an injection well, often via a pipeline. And then you drill an injection well and inject the CO2 down thousands of feet into the ground, sometimes depending on the formations.
And you can use
you can repurpose existing wells to do this. And so where I come in on this is under the Safe Drinking Water Act, EPA, and in some cases the states, depending on who has primacy, and I can talk about that. But for most states, EPA is the permit issuer. You have to get a permit from EPA to inject CO2. And one of the things, the main, piece of that is to show them that you will not be endangering any underground sources of drinking water. You're going to inject the CO2 and it's going to stay where it is. It's not going to migrate up into a reservoir that people pull drinking water from. So it's very technical. And it is, it's a kind of, EPA has only really been issuing these permits for a few years. So it's sort of, the technology isn't new, but this permitting structure and sort of the people going after CO2 storage is sort of new. And so that's been kind of a fun area to work on because there's so many different ways you can structure one of those projects. And, you can just be what we call a source to sink, where you have all on one piece of land. You've got the power plant, you've got a transmission line, and in a lot of places in the Midwest, it's like ethanol plant. You got a pipeline and you got the injection wells kind of all in one place. But then there are also sort of hub projects where you're kind of building injection wells, and then you get sources from this area, sources from this area, and people are going to pay you to take their CO2 and store it into the ground. And the idea is that is better environmentally than releasing it into the air. There's also financial incentives. There's tax credits for that. And, in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a lot of federal funding for that, but some of that has gone away. But yeah, so it's kind of a new, not new technology, but a new kind of industry. And so new permitting regime that I've been working on. That's been really fun.
You basically knew nothing about this like a few years ago, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So how do they how do you learn? Like, obviously you probably get like the best world-class way of learning this stuff. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And that could be about anything. Really.
Well, it's a great question. I mean, one thing is kind of being an environmental regulatory lawyer, you sort of learn how to, this sounds silly, but how to read regulations and how to look, what kind of things to look for when you're figuring out how to comply with those requirements. But honestly, you learn by working on them. And, in this case, we had some clients that we were kind of the first ones knocking at their door and saying, hey, we have a lot of experience with environmental permitting. You need counsel. Like, you really need a lawyer to help you with this. And they were kind of like, I don't know. I'm not sure if we really need a lawyer. And then, when they brought us in, they were like, oh, we do need a lawyer. Perfect. But yeah, so you kind of learn the regs. We work very closely with EPA during that process. So in some of those first permits, we were kind of learning it together because the EPA staff didn't really know what they were talking about. And then one of the other pieces of my job that I enjoy is working with technical people. We will often work with the consultants and engineers, and some of that at the beginning is, okay, explain to me how this works, right? And how can we show to EPA that you're not going to endanger drinking water? And they'll kind of put up a model and a PowerPoint and show you. But as you're working through these applications, which are really technically complicated, I just try to absorb everything and translate what they're saying from. It's funny. Somebody usually has to translate from lawyer speak, but I can help translate the technical speak to the regulators that maybe don't know as much as our technical folks do.
Yeah, it's funny that we live like with all of these advancements that we're going through like so fast, accelerating. Like, we all have these jobs that, like, not only is it a job that you weren't even originally taught like in school or whatever, but like the job didn't even exist, 5-10 years ago.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
I'm literally questioning people who work here who their job is like building LLMs or doing all this AI stuff. And it's like, you didn't go to school for this. No one, ChatGPT 1 wasn't even out.
Right.
Like, and now you're like a LLM master.
Yes.
Like, how did you like fall into a role that doesn't even exist? Like, that's just crazy how that works.
Yeah, it is.
And it's just kind of similar with what you're doing with the advancements in energy and how we capture and all that stuff too. So
yeah,
it's truly fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's get to a couple more things. One, do you touch any rare earth mineral stuff? That's a huge one, kind of call back to competing with China, stuff like that.
Yeah.
We want that lithium and cobalt and yada, yada. What do you deal with that with the permits?
Yeah. So, yes. And it's right now, critical minerals, I would say, are sort of on par with energy in terms of how much this administration is supporting and focused on pushing and prioritizing those projects. So there's a lot of opportunities there for mining projects that, frankly, for years, they were just not able to get permits. And so, again, going back to the point of, it depends on where the resource is. But yeah, a lot of the projects I'm working on are in like Nevada and California, where there's a lot of public lands. And so a lot of times it will be, the mining company has, 3,000 acres of leases from the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service. And they have to go to those agencies and say, okay, here's the exploration we want to do. We want to have however many drill pads, and we're going to drill for 5 years. And if we find something, then we're going to come back and we're going to mine it. And they have to get those plans approved by the agency, usually BLM. And again, BLM has to do an environmental review, and they have to look at, okay, again, groundwater issues, species issues, tribal issues are huge for those projects. And so getting through the permitting process for those, those are really long-term projects too. A lot of them are 20, 30-year approvals that they're getting.
We just learned that the lithium process is literally it's a pull and you wait for it to like rise up to the top or whatever. Like,
yeah, there's all kinds of like things that you learn about, sort of the underground mining versus, where you just have an open pit. And I'm kind of have been learning about all of that more recently too. We have a really good mining lawyer on our team who's in San Francisco, and he was at sort of in-house at a mining company before he came to the firm. So he's been helping to build up that practice. And it's been very fun to sort of work on those permits.
All right. Okay, you ready for your last question?
Sure.
Have you heard of the blunt-nosed leopard lizard?
I have heard of the blunt-nosed leopard lizard. Tell me everything. Chuck McConnell?
No, Chuck here at Collide.
Okay.
He has our most popular podcast.
Okay.
He's this eccentric figure.
Okay.
And he's an old man who likes rambling about the same things. And one of the same things he rambles about is the blunt-nosed leopard lizard.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Animals and species have a lot to do with regulation and
Yes.
Permits. And basically the story is like, the whole operation was closed down because they realized they were endangering these random lizards. And how many millions and billions in energy are these little critters causing us on a daily basis?
Well, I think with, hopefully, honestly, not a lot, because now many of those situations happened, like I'd say in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And now people, I think, are very sophisticated and will go out and do a biological survey before they have to, before they start drilling. And so one of the carbon capture and sequestration projects that I worked on in California, they had blunt-nosed leopard lizard among their other species. And they had to, they went out and they did surveys. So they figured out sort of where they are. And they also tried to, design the project to avoid areas where those little guys are. But then they also have measures that you have to educate the workers that are going to be working on the project and kind of put in measures to avoid. So if you see them, then you're supposed to fence off a little area and kind of not, try to avoid that area. It depends on the species, kind of what those measures are. But yeah, I mean, it is, the Endangered Species Act is, if you have a piece of property where there's a lot of endangered species, it will be very expensive to develop it. And so, that is something that people look at in citing their projects to try to minimize the need to deal with that. Yeah.
All right. Well, we covered pretty much everything.
Great.
Let's wrap it up with some Houston talk. Let's hype up Houston.
Yes.
I love hearing it.
Yeah.
You're an outsider.
I am.
From DC. I'm assuming you're not from DC, like born and raised.
Well, I'm from Maryland, right outside of DC.
Okay,
so kind
DMV.
of pretty close.
Yeah.
DMV.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you visit Houston a lot. Y'all have an office here.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see here in Houston? What's exciting about being here? And is this the right place to claim as the capital of the energy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. And we have a really big Houston office, and I come down here a few times a year, and I, love coming down here, honestly, because the folks in our Houston office are basically the kindest humans. But also it's great because our clients are all here. I mean, they're, some of them are downtown, some of them are in the energy corridor, but, you're kind of bouncing around and everybody's here, and everybody here kind of speaks the same language. And so, not that I'm the arbiter of these things, but I do view it as the capital, the energy capital.
Well, there's your endorsement.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, Kerry. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.